joined by Susanna Streeter, an economic analyst, and the former Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable. Good to see both of you this morning. We've got lovely viewers of this programme, and their first thought this morning is absolutely of the poor souls in Ukraine. But there's no doubt that we're going to feel an impact here in the UK, aren't we? Is the biggest impact going to be cost of living, do you think, Vince?
Yes, that's the immediate effect. I mean, first of all, it's, you know, the sanctions that are now being imposed are absolutely right, but they are going to inflict pain, and I think we have to be prepared for that. The key is the energy sector. At the moment, this is just a market reaction because there's not very much storage, people are panicking, and we are seeing this increase in gas and oil prices. It could get much worse if the energy sector is directly affected. But at the moment, you know, gas, oil are not directly affected by the sanctions, but if war or sabotage affects the flow of gas through the Ukraine, that will compound the effects. So, you know, we need to be thinking of a really big energy shock and how you protect British households from some of that. You know, all kind of things the government could do around the national insurance surcharge or universal credit. But we do need to be thinking about a really big shock.
Susanna, it feels as though Putin has planned for this. He has got billions and billions of pounds worth of fuel stockpiled. He's got a massive war chest. Despite all our talk and indeed the warnings from the UK and the US that this seemed to be inevitable to happen, we aren't really in a position, are we, to execute the full sanctions many are calling for?
That is the problem, and that's why so many have said that these sanctions are simply too little too late, because Putin has built up 640 billion in foreign currency reserves, a huge amount of money to fall back on if the screw is tightened and those sanctions really are made a lot more painful. But yes, we're not there yet. If there were moves to limit banking access even further by excluding Russia from the SWIFT banking system, which is this international payment system so crucial for transactions around the world, that would really hit. But it would also have an effect, a ricochet effect on Europe as well.
And we know that I think
Europe
Germany
is so reliant on energy supply.
Germany particularly have been dead against that because, of course, that is a huge issue for them. They get a lot of their energy from Russia. I wonder, from our viewers' perspective, Suzanne, I mean, Charlotte already mentioned that sort of gas prices or energy prices could go up by another £1,000, £3,000. We already know how huge they are right now. What other things are we going to notice are suddenly going to go up in terms of our shopping basket? Where are we going to see these prices hit us?
Well, where you could see also hit is in terms of food prices, because of the price of wheat is set to go up. Already yesterday you had wheat being exchanged on one exchange in Chicago. This is crucial. It affects us because it's to do with international food prices. Prices there shot up to the highest level since 2012. And although we don't source in the UK wheat directly from Russia, we are very sensitive to those global food prices set on those international exchanges. And that's why there could be this knock-on effect.
And Ukraine is a big producer of grain, isn't it?
Yeah, 10% of the world's supply.
Is grain. So even though if we don't, as you say, take it directly from there, other countries are affected, which shorts the supply. Interesting as well, it's things that we don't necessarily think about. So the problem with grain isn't just the growing of grain in Ukraine, it's the fact that they get a lot of their fertiliser for doing that from Russia. So it's every single link in the chain, it's metals, it's things that we wouldn't necessarily think about in our shopping basket that affect our shopping basket.
Absolutely. And you talk about metals. So there is this part of the sanctions on Russia is to limit high-tech equipment, including some semiconductor chips. The problem is Russia supplies the essential rare earth minerals, which are vital to make these chips in the first place. So if the situation escalates, you can see Russia turning off those supplies. So there could be tit-for-tat repercussions coming down the line, which can then bite consumers around the world.
Vince?
I mean, a good example is what in the metal sector. I mean, Russia is a major supplier of palladium, which produces catalytic converters that we use for modern cars, titanium, which is a sort of basic metal for the aerospace industry. So all this is going to ripple through into the manufacturing sector, quite apart from the costs on consumers.
We've got inflation at a 30-year high as well, 5.5%. talking about energy bills. Is that going to get any better?
No, it could get worse in the short run. I mean...
And what's the short run?
Well, we may be talking, 1 or 2 years, but I mean, this war, this conflict could get out of control. I mean, could spread in all kind of ways. But certainly, I think the expectation of most economic commentators is that we are set for a couple of years of slow growth, maybe falling, depression, recession, and inflation, and that could last a couple of years, 2 to 3 years.
Susanna, we've just had a horrific time across the world because of the pandemic. We have a cost of living crisis. We have fears about the NHS. You know, I'm very conscious this morning that we've already had talk of war crimes, chemical weapons, and extortionate prices when people are already scared of what they can afford. I should say, however, actually, we have put helplines if you are concerned and feeling fearful, particularly your children, because this talk is very frightening, on itv.com/helpline. So if you want some advice, already mental health is a huge problem. So if you want some advice about some of the things we're covering this morning, which we have to, because it's an important story, you can get help there. But is there anything that individuals can do in this situation to kind of insulate themselves?
Well, certainly if they can really look at their household bills, where they're spending money, do as much as they can to trim elsewhere. However, the problem is you have to try, if you can, build up some kind of financial resilience for the future. That is extremely difficult. I know for so many people who don't even know how they're going to pay for their bills, whether they should heat or eat. There is a huge amount of support out there. And energy companies are very sensitive to this situation as well. We don't know that the prices are going to shoot up to the extent that is being talked about, this £3,000 amount. We don't know just how far shopping baskets are going to go up. It's likely to go up in the short term, but still central banks, those policymakers at central banks, do expect inflation to fall back over the longer term. This certainly isn't welcome news, but certainly people shouldn't panic because we will get through it.
Vince, if you were still in politics and you were still there, what would you be advising the government? What would you like to see the government do to try and get some sort of traction in terms of Putin stopping what he's doing?
Well, I think there's several things. I think we have been weak on financial sanctions. I mean, this goes back to the Skripal murders, where, we were very angry, and rightly so, but the action was not strong. And, there is a public commitment to do something now about the oligarchs in London and their property and their finances, but we've yet to see it. I mean, an interesting problem, actually, is what you do about Switzerland, where most of this money is tied up. And that's not specifically a British problem, but, Britain and the European Union have got to be focused on the fact that Switzerland usually evades most financial sanctions. In terms of what we should be doing in government, I think the short run is how do you protect British consumers using the budget? I mean, the Chancellor was generous at the beginning of the pandemic. We may need that kind of emergency measures again. And I think we also, as a government, need to be thinking about energy supply issues. I mean, the whole lot of potential energy from onshore wind, 7 barrage, this kind of thing, we're not exploiting. But as a result, we're more dependent on external supplies than we ought to be.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Vince Cable and Susanna Reid, thanks for joining us this morning.